What's up, everybody? I'm Jason, and welcome back to the vlog. So this is the vlog for Friday, the 29th of October, 2021, and I'm going to start off by saying I should know better than to ever record a vlog earlier in the week than Thursday. Every time I've done it, I have turned around and someday, like if I do it on Wednesday, which I did this week, Thursday something happens, or Friday morning something happens that's worth talking about that I don't want to just sit on for another week and go on. So today in the vlog, this is going to be a long episode. I apologize in advance. I have three things that I want to talk about today. First off is the new Lightroom 11, the October 2021 update. And then the big topic at the end is going to be, not because it's least important, but just because it's where I put it, is going to be Nikon's newly announced Z9. So let's just dive in. I want to try and get through the start stuff as quickly as I can to get to the Z9, because there's a lot to talk about there. Well, kind of. So Lightroom 11. New update from Adobe just came out, and quite honestly, I'm pretty happy with it so far. They've made one major improvement as far as I'm concerned, and one minor recovery of features, let's call it that. So the recovery of features is that Adobe, for whatever reason, I don't understand why, for whatever reason, when Canon went to the CR3 image format, so on the R5, R6, EOS R, 1DX Mark III, etc., Adobe no longer had camera-specific color matching profiles. So if you're a Canon user, obviously, you know, standard, portrait, landscape, neutral, etc. Lightroom provided color profiles or Adobe provided color profiles in Lightroom that matched those functions, or matched them. That's the word I'm looking for. And for some reason, when the CR3 format cameras came out, that went away, and I don't quite understand why. So for the last year that I've been shooting with an R5 in Lightroom, I haven't had camera matched profiles. Now, I don't tend to use camera matched profiles. Well, when it comes to color profiles in Lightroom, my position is largely, I use what makes the image look best to me. So a lot of times it's Adobe's profile, sometimes that's Canon's profile. It all just kind of depends on what the contrast, tonal range, color rendering, etc., what makes the image look best to me. And personally, I think that's how you should be doing it. You know, not getting stuck on, well, it's a landscape, so I shoot Canon landscape or something like that, but shoot what, you know, in the end, what looks good. So Lightroom 11 brings those color matching profiles from Adobe for the EOS R3, R5, R6, and 1DX Mark III. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like the R is getting one. Canon does say that they have more coming. I don't know if that means, or did I say Canon? Adobe does say that they have more coming. I don't know if that means more including the R, or more including newer cameras or other cameras. I'm not really sure. That they weren't super clear, or weren't clear about that in their announcement. And so, you know, there is that. Now, in software, there are definitely camera profiles or color profiles for the R5, because I've looked. I can't speak to anything else specifically. And they also haven't updated their camera support, or their supported camera table, to reflect this, because it still shows that they don't have camera-specific color profiles available for the R5, etc. Hopefully they'll get that updated soon. At least it wasn't updated when I looked at it last night when they announced this. The big improvement, as far as I'm concerned, to Lightroom 11 is the new masking system. So they've gotten rid of the gradient, the circular, and the spot adjust, or whatever they call it, brush tools. They've combined that all into one masking engine masking tool that now has multiple layers. It does those three existing masks. So you can do a mask with a brush, you can do a mask with a linear gradient, you can do a mask with a circular gradient. It also now has, and this is huge as far as I'm concerned, sky detection and subject detection masking. And it processes the image. I've been playing with the sky detect. I don't do a lot of person masking per se, but it does do more than just people. It will actually, in what I was playing with, like it masked product photography stuff. Needed a little cleanup, but it did a reasonable job at masking out the product in a product image. But you can do all of this, and then you can combine, intersect, add, subtract, have multiple masks, etc. And now there's basically, if you're used to Photoshop and the like layers panel, you now have a layers panel for sort of manipulating the masks or selecting masks. So you no longer have to find the pin in the image area and hope that is the right mask. You now actually have individual masks that are listed in a table format that you can select from, that and manipulate and work with. So some of this stuff is pretty impressive. If you're a landscape photographer, you can do things like use the sky detection. If you want to, and you can invert masks. So what you could do, like I was going to say, is if you're a landscape photographer, you can use the sky detection to pick the sky. Then you can duplicate that mask and invert it. And now you're selecting the land. And now you have two masks that are inversions of each other. One to allow you to manipulate the sky and adjust it independently, and one to allow you to manipulate the foreground and the land, etc., and adjust it and manipulate it independently. And it's really nice. It's really powerful. It's a really good step forward. So there's a couple of minor updates too to Lightroom 11. There's a new improved metadata panel and workflow. You can now customize what will be shown or what metadata entries. So from XF, IPTC, maker notes, etc. You can customize that in the user interface. So in the past, you've been able to customize what kind of things you saw on the metadata panel, but basically it required that you needed to go download the Lightroom SDK, learn how to write a plugin, and write a plugin to do that. In Lightroom 11, it's now you click customize and you pick the things that you want and order them how you want, and that's what you get. So that's a good step forward, because quite honestly, having the right information in at your fingertips is always something that I find to be an incredibly useful thing. Additionally, there's now an edit-only mode where it will hide all of the things that you can't edit. So shutter speeds, ISOs, apertures, camera serial numbers. And it will only show you the entries that you can edit. So things like title, caption, that kind of thing, heading. And this is probably going to be really useful if you're a journalist working out of Lightroom instead of something else, because now you have a very concise interface to fill out all of that information, the captions, the headings, etc., on your images. So there were three other little new improvements. There's an improvement to the XMP editing workflow. I don't really use that, so I'm not really in a position to comment on whether it's a big deal, a little deal, no deal, some other deal, or whatever. There's a improvement to the date filtering that I haven't played with yet. I don't usually filter an awful lot by date, but I know people do. It's something that's available. But there's some improvements for being able to search and filter by dates. And then there's new premium. I don't know why they call them premium. That they don't charge you for them. They come in the software. So it seems like, whatever. But premium develop presets for, it's the applying styles to a variety of, new subject matter. I think there's a cinematography too. There's a food or something like that. Anyway, Lightroom 11. So far, it's been stable. There is a new catalog format, so it will have to update your catalog. If you are backing stuff up, there's also a new, which you should be. There's also a specifically, not just, there's a new LR cat data, something like that folder in the LR catalog folder, where you store your catalogs. That has to be backed up as well. That's important as part of the catalog. So you need to make sure that if you're doing, if your backups are filtering on your Lightroom catalog folder or your Lightroom folder. So this doesn't apply to most people probably, but some people will not back up previews because they're previews and they can be generated later. And for example, in my catalog, I have about 27 gig of images as previews. That's 27 gig of data that isn't really important to back up. So, generally speaking, things like that, I don't recommend backing up if you know how to filter them out, because you're just wasting backup space. So, that said, this new LR cat data folder, again, let me just double check so that I'm not, LR cat dash data is what the folder is called. That folder, you also need to back up with your catalog file. You cannot just back up the LR cat catalog file. So that's Lightroom 11 in a nutshell. Updates, if you are a Lightroom user, it definitely looks like it's worth the upgrade. I have not had any stability issues or problems with it either so far, so that's good. Good so far. Haven't spent a ton of time in it though. Okay, that's the little stuff out of the way. The big stuff that I wanted to, or the big thing that I wanted to talk about is Nikon's Z9. And I have to say, I'm really excited. I'm not a Nikon user, so I'm not going to buy one, and it's not good enough. I'm not going to switch. But I'm really excited to see that Z9. Finally, Nikon has a mirrorless camera that is not warmed over recycled hardware. I hate to say it. Well, I don't hate to say it because as far as I can tell, it's pretty close to an accurate representation of what they have put on the market. But the Z6 and Z7 and the Z6 II and Z7 II, regardless of what Nikon says about them, very much are warmed over D750 and D850 sensors in hackneyed. I mean, the Z6 and the first gen Z6 and Z7s were like, what was Nikon even thinking? I just don't understand what their thought process was there. But the Z6 II, Z7 II, tiny incremental upgrades using essentially the same sensor technology and hardware. And broadly put, that was a huge limiting factor for Nikon. So, in their cameras, that they just things that the Z6 II and Z7 II couldn't do, and there was they can add it in software. So I'm really excited to see Nikon actually bringing a mirrorless camera to market. And the thing I think that quality, solid, designed to be a real mirrorless camera to market. The other thing that I'm really excited about with the Z9 is that it looks like, at least it looks to me, like the Nikon marketing people that have been running the company into the ground for the last 10 years aren't designing the cameras anymore. And I've said this before, but there's been this running trend that I've seen in Nikon cameras for the last it easily 10 years, where there's features and functions and specifications. For example, the ISO 3.2 million on the D5 and D6, that clearly, if you looked at the pictures, somebody was writing checks the engineers couldn't cash. I was helping a friend of mine when he got a D500 brand new when it was first released, helping him set it up. One of the processes we do is we go through and set up sharpening and noise reduction, etc. at all of the ISO speeds, all the way up to the 1.6 million that it tops out at. And on the D500 at 1.6 million, there wasn't a usable picture there. So the Z9 really looks like Nikon is not doing the incredibly, like, well, we'll just put a big number that we can't really take into, can't really produce, or can't really do things well at. So I don't see anything in the specifications for the camera that really scream like somebody's writing checks that can't be cashed. Now, that said, I am concerned. I won't say I'm dubious of. I am concerned about some of the claims. So the simple reality is that Nikon, there's laws about advertising. It's the simple reality is that everything that Nikon's saying that they either the camera does or is coming, the camera either does or is coming. So they can't say that it's 90 frames per second at 45 megapixels, and then not actually deliver that. And it only does 50 frames a second or 30 frames a second. So they actually have to deliver what they're claiming. However, as with everything in the camera industry, the number of asterisks that come after the claim is getting to be a little bit concerning. What the actual capabilities and limitations are going to be is going to be interesting, because there's stuff in the Z9, and I'm not going to say, I'm not saying that they're not being honest about it. I think the camera is doing what it claims to do. But the caveats that come with that and what the actual results are going to be very interesting to see. So let's just dive in and talk about some stuff with the camera, what I see, what I'm curious about, or what I think is kind of confusing. So we're going to start with the autofocus system. There's a lot that I like in the autofocus system, or in what Nikon's selling with the autofocus system in the camera. From a technology perspective, they're still behind as far as I'm concerned. Nikon, Sony, everybody who's still using embedded phase sensors or embedded phase pixels in their sensors is behind the curve as far as I'm concerned. I still very much believe that dual pixel sensor technology is the best possible solution for autofocus. Now, of course, there's pros and cons to that. So dual pixel sensors, you have to read out the sensor data, whereas embedded phase pixels, you could design the sensors so that the phase pixels are being read out separately from the actual sensor data. It's a different kind of thing. So I'm not going to say there's one right and one wrong, but I'm also not going to say that, specific points, pixels, Nikon talks about how there's 493 focus points. And quite honestly, with the whole thing in mirrorless cameras, focus points should be gone. I don't understand, for example, why Canon decided to go back and talking about focus points. The only thing, they made a big deal about when dual pixel AF came out, that the only thing that was relevant now was sensor coverage. How much of the sensor area was covered. And of course, on a camera like the R5 or the R3, it's 100% of the sensor area. You have autofocus capabilities, width, height, whole thing. points are pointless as far as I'm concerned at this point. Either you have enough density in your autofocus system that you can put the box anywhere in the viewfinder or anywhere on the frame, or you don't. So let's stop talking about points, because I don't really see any value in it anymore. In fact, this is going to be a running theme, to be honest, with talking about the Z9, but really all cameras at this point. There is so much stuff that's gotten to a point where it just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter anymore. The capabilities are, it's just numbers for the sake of numbers. So anyway, back to what I'm talking about. So Nikon says, or Nikon, what I like is they are actually shipping this camera with a wide range of subjects that were automatically detected in the autofocus system. So they are saying that it will detect people, dogs, cats, birds, cars, motorcycles, bicycles, trains, and planes. And they're also making a big deal about the fact that you need no menu changes. Now, I have some questions with all of this. First of all is bicycles, trains, and planes. So, in my experience, at least, shooting on my R5, for example, planes are kind of, well, in my experience in just photography in general, planes and trains, I don't really see the value in autofocus detection and tracking. Generally speaking, planes are easy targets for any kind of tracking subject detection thing. And at least on my R5, and every time I've shot air show type stuff, it automatically jumps on and locks two planes anyway, regardless. Like, it's not like, didn't need to be AI trained to track planes. So I'm not really sure about those. Obviously, it gives Nikon something to say that their camera can track that nobody else is tracking, that I just don't see where the value is. And the same thing goes for bicycles. Generally, if you're shooting bicycles, so my thought process with that is you're shooting a bicycle race. The thing you want in focus is the person on the bicycle, not the bicycle. And people who are riding bicycles should generally fall into the people being tracked category. That's certainly where Canon has pushed or talked about things, is eye, face, head, body detection is the thing you're focusing on in for like motorcycles, motorsports, bicycle racing, etc., with the head and body detection being the thing that picks up when your face is obscured, say in a full face helmet. So I'm not quite sure what the actual value of bicycles, trains, and planes are. Motorcycles and cars, obviously, that goes to motorsports. You don't necessarily have a person to lock onto, although generally in motorsports, or motorcycles at least, you should be able to go back to body detection. But, I'll give them that, because I think Canon claims on the R3 it does cars and motorcycles. The second point, though, there is with no menu change. Now, I'm not clear what that actually entails. So on my R5, as best as I've been able to tell in my testing, the subject to detect menu entry doesn't change the capability of the autofocus system as much as it changes the priority of what it's looking for. And prioritization seems like it's something that's really important to me. Now, it's challenging to test this, because there's always kind of odds and ends and various cases and so forth. The prioritization seems important to me because, for example, and I've been, if I'm sort of staring off kind of to the side a little bit, I've got the Nikon website open, and there's a video of the autofocus tracking birds in flight. And so here's an example of why I think prioritization is important. I have shot birds in flight on beaches where the birds in flight fly low along the beach and intersperse with people. So as the bird's flying along, say, just off the beach, and I'm tracking the bird, there's people that are walking along the edge of the water on the beach, and what I want the camera to track is the bird, not to jump to people, because they're more important. And this is the prioritization point. So it's one thing if you're just shooting a bird in the sky, and in which case I'm not entirely sure how important the AI-based subject detection is anyway, because a thing in the sky is generally easy to detect, track, and so forth. But when you're shooting something where you end up with a mixed scenario, so you're shooting a dog show or something, and there's people there, but the whole point of what you're shooting are the dogs. You're shooting birds in flight, and they fly by where people are standing. Well, what I don't want to happen as the photographer is the camera to decide, oh, person, that's more important. People are more important than birds. Jump to the person, and then jump back to the bird. Maybe if that happens, like that's a potential issue. So the question for me is the no menu changes. Is that because they've removed the prioritization that basically every other camera platform is giving you the option to change? Or is that because they still have the prioritization, but they aren't forcing you to choose something? So on an R5, for instance, you basically have prioritize people, prioritize animals, don't prioritize detecting anything, are like the three options. So that's an open question that I'd like to see where that goes. But like I said, I'm more power to them. In fact, sort of to draw this to the other thing, draw this kind of back in general. One of the things that I find frustrating in the way that camera companies are doing cameras now is they're still treating cameras with the same sort of, well, buy a new one. It's the car dealer mentality. Oh, you don't want to, you want to upgrade the firmware on your infotainment system. Buy a new car. Not, as far as I'm concerned, a really good way to do it. I really would like to see, and this applies to Nikon, this applies to Sony, this applies to Canon, especially Canon because I'm a Canon user, a common autofocus core part of the firmware. Like when Canon brought the motorsports and car tracking to the R3, there should be a firmware update available for the R5, the R6, the R, whatever, anything that can support the intelligent tracking, to add those coefficients, for lack of a better word, to track that stuff. And this should just be a sort of continuous upgrade process. Like, I shouldn't have to buy an R3 to be able to track cars. Or, when Canon adds lizard detection or whatever in frog detection in a year or something like that, I shouldn't have to buy an R1 to have frog detection. Like, this should be, so long as the processor in the camera is capable of doing the coefficient analysis or whatever, because this isn't machine learning in the camera. This is the application of machine learned algorithms to the information in the camera. but I should be able to continuously upgrade the autofocus system. And like I said, this applies to everybody. If you're a Nikon user, you should be getting upgrades to your autofocus. This should just be like a rolling development thing. As we get more bird images, or we get more snake images, or we get more caribou images, or whatever, just keep expanding the range of capabilities that the autofocus can handle and push that out to the cameras. And yes, would it be great if you could do the Nikon style thing of not having to select something? But quite honestly, if I've got a 2 or 3 year old camera and I'm getting an update that adds giraffe detection, and I have to select African game or something like that to get the camera to do giraffes and gazelles, then I'm okay with that, because I'm getting the capability. Like, this should be a rolling upgrade kind of thing. It's, in my opinion, it's time to stop some of this stuff. It's time to stop treating cameras like we've treated cameras for the last 20 or 30 years, where new capabilities come in when you buy a new camera, and start treating them like smartphones with software updates that add capabilities and functionality on a continuous rolling basis. Because in part too, quite frankly, the technology, sensor resolutions, etc., stopping, it doesn't matter that much anymore. And I'm saying this, like, I've said this repeatedly with my R5. Going from 30 megapixels to 45 megapixels has not made a material, it does not make my images 50% better. There's going to be a huge improvement for Nikon people going from 20 megapixel D6s or D5s or 16 megapixel D4s to 45 megapixel Z9s. That crosses that boundary into there. That is such a big improvement in terms of resolution that definitely they're going to see a big change. But once you're past really that 36 megapixel range, the returns that you get from more just it's diminished. It diminishes. And it diminishes to the point that, looking at my pictures, for example, stuff that I shot on, like, I can see where there's an improvement from stuff I shot on a 10 megapixel camera to a 22 megapixel camera to my 30 pixel 5D Mark IVs. But then looking at the 5D Mark IVs to my R5, I mean, I like using the R5 a lot better. It's a better camera for a lot of reasons, but the pictures aren't 50% better. The pictures are slightly better. So anyway, back to the Z9. AF detection. Okay, this is another one of those things that, as far as I'm concerned, the numbers are meaningless. So Nikon's advertising -6.5 to 19 EV100 is the normal range, and -8.5 to 19 EV is the Starlight mode. As I said, I don't really see where this is relevant anymore, talking about it. I mean, obviously they're going to advertise it. Marketing is going to market everything that they have as a discussion point. What I've found with my R5 is that it focuses... Well, what I found with my R5, at least, is that it focuses down to a point where I can't shoot anymore. There's just no value in shooting. The images are just not, useful. That's at -6 EV, -6.5 EV, -8.5 EV. Yeah, I don't see what it doesn't matter that much. I do like, I guess you could say, I do like that Nikon has a Starlight mode. My suspicion is that the Starlight focusing mode is going to be basically, my guess is that how it works is they slow down the polling. The longer integration time, the limiting factor with all of this autofocus stuff, in fact, this applies to DSLRs too. The limiting factor with autofocus in terms of light levels is noise. It's a sensor a photo sensor just the same as our camera sensors are. And anybody who's shot a picture at all knows that as you increase the as you decrease the light, you basically end up with more noise. The read noise, there's so much less signal, there's so much more amplification, you end up with a noisier image. Now, when you're doing autofocus, you have to be able to limit the photographic response to that is increase the exposure time. So, if I'm shooting at night, instead of shooting at a 4,000th of a second, I shoot at 4 seconds or something like that. And by leaving the sensor longer, it collects more light, therefore it gets more signal, therefore I manage to keep the noise levels down. You can do that with an exposure because you can dictate how long the exposure is going to last. You can't do that with the autofocus system. Well, you can, but the assumption with the autofocus system is always that it's focusing. So it has to be able to make a measurement, drive the lens, make a measurement, and it has to be able to do this fast enough to be useful. So you'll see this on every camera. As you get darker and darker, it slows down. So they increase the integration time or shutter speed, for lack of however you want to put it. They decrease the shutter speed. They increase the integration time for the autofocus sensor. So it sits and takes a longer reading. Or collects more signal. The autofocus rate that the lens is driven at slows down because as the sensor is being driven slower or going slower to collect more signal, you can't move the lens as fast because it takes longer between sensor, measurements and updates. So, what I suspect Starlight View is doing is basically just saying, well, we can go even slower. So instead of updating 15 times a second in very low light levels, we'll update 5 times a second or something like that. That there's kind of no two ways around what you can do. You can read from the sensor, you can amplify it, and you can do something, but you can't not like there's no well, we use a different AF point kind of thing. So why I don't understand that Nikon is the only company that has the intelligence to do this kind of thing or to do this kind of thing is beyond me. Because dialing back the autofocus performance in very low light levels, increasing the integration time for the autofocus sensor at very low light levels just makes sense. And doing it as an option like this just makes sense. So your regular autofocus capabilities have, the faster integration times. There's enough information in the image that it could do the subject detection, etc. Because that doesn't, that's part of the process. That's not going away. In fact, Nikon makes a point about that subject detection and AF work all the way down to -6.5 EV. But why not? Why is nobody else have okay, I'm going to put the camera in even slower mode? Of course, I say that, but then I also will say that in my experience, these numbers are completely useless. Because I've gone out and focused on stars that I'm pretty sure were darker than -5.6 or 6.5 EV or whatever with my R5. Again, this is one of those things. It's not like you hit this limit and things just stop working. You hit the limit and things don't work as well. And what Nikon's really guaranteeing with the Starlight View is you get 2.5 or 2 more EV of still works correctly or still works within the engineering tolerances or the guarantees that they're willing to make. Now, on a slight tangential note, because this is not directly related to the autofocus system, but one thing I'm really happy to see in the Z9, again, is the ISO range is 32 to, the ISO range is 64 to 25,600. That's the base range in 1/3 and 1/3 and 1 stop step sizes, with 2 lows, so it goes, or 1 low, so it goes all the way down to 32 equivalent, and 3 highs, so 2 highs. So it goes up to 102,400. So the range is now, we now have Nikon cameras back in the range of sane ISOs again. Which, as far as I'm concerned, what this actually means is that you will probably be getting really nice pictures at ISO 102,000. I mean, at least they'll be at least comparable with what you're getting from Sony or Canon at those ISOs, because you'll be able to count on it. And this was a big frustration that I had, or a big criticism that I had with the D5 and D6, is that, yes, they could go to ridiculously high ISOs, but the image quality was atrocious, to the point where I didn't feel, from what I had seen with the images, that you could confidently, as a photographer, count on getting a good quality image out of those settings. So historically, Nikon had always made the setting, well, there have been issues. There are places where there are issues. They haven't been as good as Canon in some respects, but historically, at least with respect to image quality, Nikon has always at least guaranteed that you got a usable image. And I really, with the D5, D6, and D500 at the top high ISOs, I didn't find the images were usable. They weren't I didn't even, everything, as I put it, everything looked like Sasquatch. You could take a picture of UFO and people would think it was Sasquatch. You could take a picture of somebody committing a crime and it was Sasquatch. Like, they were that bad. And so having a sane ISO range again on a Nikon camera, I think, is a really good thing to see. Now, of course, you didn't need to use but whatever. So let's see, moving along. 120 frame per second stills. So this is one of those things where I'm going to just go, what's the point? I'm at a loss as to what the point. There has been a rolling, you could call it almost the new ISO war or megapixel wars or whatever, but there's been a rolling thing in sports cameras for higher and higher frame rates, more and more and more. The R5 got Canon up to the 1DX3, the R6 and the R5 got Canon up to 20 frames a second. Unfortunately, they're locked at 20 frames a second. You can't slow it down. The R6 got Canon to 30. The Z9 gets Nikon to, well, this is where it gets complicated. So based on the data that Nikon has published, you get 20 frames a second if you shoot RAW plus JPEG. You get 30 frames a second if you shoot JPEG. I can't tell what you get if you shoot RAW only, because there's nothing in the specs that say what you get, with the exception of there is a line in the shutter information that says top continuous shooting speed at full resolution 20 frames per second. So I'm taking, like, this is contradictory to the 100 or to the 30 frames per second. Maybe there's a crop factor going on. Again, we're getting into this asterisk, on the whatever you want to call it, the webpage for the Z9 that, there's nothing there that says what it will do in RAW only. So that's a open question as far as I'm concerned. Of course, like I said, I'm totally lost as to why. Well, okay, I can kind of see the value people might see in shooting 30 frame per second stills or 120 frame per second stills instead of just flipping over to movie mode and shooting a video. The thing being is, if you're a still photographer, your workflow and editing is going to be developed around stills and not video. And so even though you could extract a frame out of the video and use that as your still, that's not how your workflow is going to be set up. What I still don't quite get is the value in, the frame rates we're getting at, or how much I should say that the frame rates that we're getting at basically get you to it's pointless to talk about. It's getting increasingly irrelevant to talk about frame rates because, again, at some point they just don't matter anymore. 30 frames per second, 20 frames per second, you're basically shooting video with individual frames at 30 frames a second. You're shooting video with individual frames, and you start getting into it's just numbers. The meaning is kind of, as far as I'm concerned, the meaning's going away. I'd say that my experience, that applies even at 20 frames a second. The value of the numbers just kind of goes away. Something to caution is a point of caution around the shutter, electronic shutter, etc. Word of caution is be aware of the caveats when you're reading through the documentation or the marketing on this. So there is a big caveat to the fastest electronic shutter, or the world's world's most minimal rolling shutter distortion and fastest read rates and all of that. The caveat is based on Nikon's testing as of October 21st or something like that, 2021, for cameras 30 megapixels and higher. And why I'm saying a caveat to this is they didn't test an R3. Now you could say, well, the R3 is only 24 megapixels. It's that's definitely excluded. But I know there are going to be people who are going to make a deal about this, and they're going to talk about how this is so much faster, blah blah blah, than the Canon R3. And since the R3 isn't shipping, Nikon doesn't have one to test. So if you are one of these people, or if you're coming across somebody that's talking about this and they're comparing it, so the cameras that this can compare to are the A1, the A7R, the R5. I think that's about it. So those are your what the camera is actually comparing. So the A7R4 or A7R5, whatever the latest A7R is. Be careful if you're watching, reading, whatever. Be careful not to make assumptions about what this translates to with respect to, like I said, the Canon R3. Yeah, they're different classes of camera. I'm not saying that the Z9 isn't potentially better. I'm not saying that the Z9 isn't potentially faster. But I am saying that be careful. This is that asterisk thing that's becoming so prevalent in the camera industry. Be careful of who you are assuming what the thing is compared to. Okay, video on the Z9. So here again is the asterisk little caveat. So what Nikon is advertising, and of course what they're advertising, I believe that the camera can do, because it would be illegal for them to advertise the camera did something that it can't do. So 8K 30, 2 hours, they're claiming 2 hours without overheating, asterisks. 4K 30 oversampled. My assumption here is this is going to be 2 hours of shooting without overheating, asterisks, because they're not saying that. 4K 120, obviously 1080p, blah, blah, blah. H.265 and ProRes 422HQ. 422 ProRes 10-bit, H.265 8 and 10-bit, H.264 8-bit. So pretty good range. Full HD, 4K, UHD, and HK, what was that? QHD, QUHD, whatever it is. Unfortunately, Nikon, as usual, only does TV resolutions. There is no DCI frame sizes available, as far as I can tell. So if you're trying to or expecting to use the camera in a DCI aspect ratio, you do not have full 4K, so 4096 pixels wide, and you do not have full 8K, 8192 pixels wide. You have 3840 and 7680. Unfortunately, they get called 4K and 8K when they don't actually have 4000 or 8000 pixels. It's a little bit, I find it frustrating. Well, I guess one nice thing is that they're now doing 24-bit audio instead of 16-bit audio. I'm not quite sure what Canon's doing in the R3. I don't remember now. But then with the COM port thing in the R3, you may be able to do 24 or 32-bit. It's because it'd be recorded externally, you know. Plus, they're advertising that next year the camera will get a firmware update for 12-bit RAW, 8K 60p frame per sec, or 8K 60 frame per second video, and 12-bit RAW, 8K 60p frame per second video. Now, here's where I get cautious about this. All of this testing was done at, quote, room temperature, unquote, of 23°C or 73.4 degrees Fahrenheit. I have no idea what the margin is. Nobody talks about this, and this frustrates me to no end with Canon, Nikon, Sony, all of the companies that are doing this, that are doing video. What we know is that sensor thermal stability. Look at cinema cameras that are engineered to produce video. They have active cooling on the sensor. They have a big heat sink on the sensor. They have better cooling on the processors. Thermal stability in shooting is super important. And when you put a camera in a tiny mirrorless body, you don't have the room for the active cooling. When you put sensor-based vibration reduction or image stabilization or in-body image stabilization, whatever you want to call it, you mitigate your ability to cool the part. When you stack your sensor and processor, which is what Canon, Nikon, Sony, everybody in the small format world is doing this now, you are putting a heat source on with the processor. So the question is, what are the margins? What is I find it reasonable that in a full-size gripped body the size of the Z7 that they should get better recording times than, say, you would get in an ungripped R5 or an ungripped A1. That's reasonable. The question to me, though, is what are the margins? If I'm shooting and it's 95 degrees out and I'm in the sun, how long do I get for recording? Because I know if I'm shooting on a cinema camera with active cooling and all of that, I'm not going to have an overheating problem. I'm not going to be thermally limited. That's the whole point of the cooling. Where's the margin on like I said, the Z9? Margins for Canon's cameras are not terribly great as far as I'm concerned. But the question, and then compounding that, when they decide that they're going to do 8K 60 RAW, which I'm not sure how they're actually going to do. I believe them when they say it's coming. I'm not doubting that, again, truth in advertising says that they have to be able, that if they're advertising that they're going to deliver this, that they will be able to deliver that, or they will deliver it. Or at least they should be able to deliver it. It does not come with a forward-looking statement asterisk on the firmware updates notification, notice on the web page. So they don't even get to say, well, we started working on it and we thought we'd have it, but we couldn't make it work quite right, so we're canceling it. I mean, I guess they can always cancel it, that's true, but I don't think that there's a lot of value in saying, if they didn't think they could do it now, they wouldn't be doing it, or wouldn't be talking about it. So the question to me is how that's actually going to work. And then the bigger question to me is going to be, if you're shooting at 8K 60, how long can you shoot for? Because so this just comes down to it. The reality is, and I don't care what brand you are. The reality is 8K is a massive truckload of data to deal with. At 24 or 30 frames per second, it's a massive truckload of data to deal with. But at 60 frames a second, it's pretty close to insane. So what kind of cards are you going to need for that? How fast? I guess this is it's clearly going to be, you're going to need CF Express, the fastest that you can get, because there's just no I'm not sure how, I guess maybe hardware compression could do, potentially they're going to do it in RAW. In which case, boy, it's going to be some data. It's really going to be interesting. So kind of actually, like I said, I'm kind of actually, okay. So personally, I don't care about 8K. I'm still shooting in 1080p. I don't have anywhere near the space to shoot in 4K, let alone 8K, as much as I'd like to say, oh, I want to shoot in 8K. But combine that with, I don't see value in 8K in most places. People aren't running 8K monitors. Yes, people have there are 8K TVs on the market now. Samsung has basically all of their premier TVs are 8K at this point. The problem, though, is that most people sit far enough away from a TV that they can't see an advantage of 4K, let alone over 1080p, that they can't see the advantage of 4K over that the advantage of 8K over 4K is wasting disk space and bragging rights. But you're not, there isn't this, you're not gaining something, especially with video. And this has actually been a problem that I've been working on, trying to figure out a way to talk about video resolution as part of my R5 series. And the problem I keep running into is the conditions and problems and the way you see things in a still is completely different from the conditions and the way you perceive things in a video. And once things start moving, your ability to see detail decreases dramatically. And so on one hand, on the still side of things, you can talk about, where, yes, there is value in higher resolutions because you can have more detailed images. When you start getting into video, the value of the higher resolutions, it diminishes in a way it doesn't really instills. It's not the same kind of process. It's not the same perceptually. It's not the same, what do I want to say? It's not the same mental, you don't perceive things the same way. So, 8K as a whole, I don't really care about. I'm like, I mean, obviously, you're not going to launch a flagship camera like this and not, you know, especially at 45 megapixels and not deliver at 8K, or 8K video. But I'm less and less concerned with the 8K video. What I'm really interested to see, though, is since Nikon seems to be doing unlimited recording times now, whether we will get that patched into Canon cameras like the R5 and R6, because they've patched it. The R3 does unlimited recording times, but now Canon definitely has, I mean, not that the R5 is suddenly going to be able to do unlimited 8K recording, but the R5 definitely, like, everybody else is going to have or has cameras in that tier that does unlimited recording except Canon. And it's something that I don't see any reason that they can't patch into or patch out of the system with a firmware update. All they have to do is do it. So come on, Canon. Let's see. Moving along. IBIS. So this is, and I'm not blaming Nikon. Oh, I am blaming. I don't like marketers. This just stuck out to me, and it just annoyed me to no end. But I don't like marketers. Their job is to do everything short of lie when representing their products. So they obviously want the biggest, broad, best spin on everything short of actually telling a lie, which is why we keep getting this star, caveat crap in our marketing. It needs, it needs to stop. I hate it. We also need to start talking about getting better image stabilization metrics, or a better way to discuss it, or a standard that manufacturers have to follow that actually tells us something useful. Because, so, it used to be easy. I mean, 20 years ago, it was real easy, or 30 years ago, it was real easy. There was no image stabilization at all. Everything was unstabilized. Easy. Okay. It used to be like dawn of image stabilization. It used to be easy. Image stabilization was in lens by basically everybody. In fact, it was in lens by pretty much, well, anyway, it was in lens, which meant if you wanted to know what kind of stabilization you got for any lens on your camera, you looked at what the standard specifications from the lens were. So you looked at the lens said 2 stops. You looked at another lens, it said 4 stops, whatever. Then we started down the whole road with in-body image stabilization. Now, the problem with in-body image stabilization is that, the benefit of in-body image stabilization is it can stabilize things that in-lens can't. So it can stabilize, everybody talks about 5-axis image stabilization. So that's translation, yaw, pitch, and then roll. So, those, which you can't do all of that in lens, because you can tilt and you can do translation and you can do pitch and yaw in lens, depending on which you want to do. So one of the things that most people don't quite grasp, isn't quite talked about a lot with image stabilization, is not every motion needs to be stabilized the same way or to the same extent. What the research basically has said is the vast majority of in-lens image stabilizers only stabilize pitch and yaw. They don't stabilize translation. That was Canon's hybrid in-lens image stabilizer that did pitch, yaw, and translation. And the reason for this is just the mechanics of how people shake when they hold a camera. Is you tend to shake more in pitch and yaw than you shake in actual level translation. At macro distances, the translation aspect starts becoming a more of a factor, which is why when Canon started with their hybrid in-lens optical stabilization, they had it in the macro lenses only. They didn't have it in every other lens because it just wasn't necessary. So in-body can do roll, which you can't do in a lens at all. It's not possible, because you can roll the elements, but it doesn't matter how much you roll the elements. Lens is symmetric optically, or is symmetric around the optical axis. You can't roll the image by rolling the lens. You have to roll the sensor. Okay, so those are the benefits. Now the problems is how much image stabilization you get, the effect of whatever you've designed the sensor to displace is not going to be equivalent or the same from lens to lens to lens. So a wide angle lens may get better performance with in body than in lens, and the in-body stabilizer that's 4 stops or quoted at 4 stops may get you the full 4 stops on, say, a 24 millimeter lens. But when you shift over to a 400 millimeter lens, it doesn't have the ability to do the shifts necessary to match the motion of the lens. And so it doesn't provide the full 4 stops. Now, obviously, the whole point of in lens is that it can be optimized as best as possible to the lens and focal length and so forth that it's in. Now we take things a step further. The EOS R, or the RF mounts, the Canon's EOS R system and Nikon's Z system do coordinated, or as Nikon calls it, synchro VR, coordinates image stabilization between the lens and the camera. Which means the behavior, the performance is going to be radically different all over the place. Not necessarily in a bad way. I mean, I'm not saying that this is bad, but it means that when you put your 24-70 f2.8 that is stabilized or isn't stabilized, or your old one that isn't stabilized on the camera, you're going to get one set of performances. And just even if you're, even if you just go back to the straight in-body, no in-lens stabilization, you're not getting 4 stops or whatever the system maximum level of stabilization is. You're not getting that at every focal length and with every lens. So you're talking, you could have wide angle lenses that are getting 4 stops and mid-length lenses that are getting 3s and telephotos that are getting 1.5. What is it? Like, nobody getting actual information with lenses is incredibly difficult. Compounding that, when you go to the, combined, the coordinated, the synchronized, whatever you want to call it. Now you have the situation of, well, look I knew the lens could do 4 stops at 24 millimeters and 3 stops at 70 millimeters, or whatever the lens was measured and specified at on its own. What does that translate to with the in-body addition? Now, what does that translate to when I change cameras? This isn't necessarily a problem now, but it's going to become an increasingly convoluted mess that us as photographers don't really have a handle on. And I mean, this is broader than Nikon. So this isn't a criticism of Nikon. This is a criticism of everybody that's doing this, and why I think we need a new standard to, that companies have to adhere to, that we actually get information. Or we need a third party to start testing this stuff. Like, I would be stoked if the Digital Picture or Lens Rentals or DxOMark or somebody built, or whatever they had to do, a CIPA standard lens image stabilization testing machine. And when they did their lens tests for resolution, tested the stabilization stuff. Because, like I said, we're increasingly running into this situation where, and I'm going to use Canon as an example. My 24-70 f2.8 IS, I put it on my R5, it performs 8 stops, or it performs like this. I put it on an R3, how does it perform? I mean, right now we have information with that because it's a current lens on current cameras, and Canon's saying what it does. What happens when the 24-70 f2.8 IS Mark II comes out and the R5 is no longer the current camera, it's this older generation, and it's the R5 Mark II and the R1 and the R3 Mark II, and what does that do on my camera? Because you don't have to throw your camera away every time a new one comes out. You don't have to upgrade. And as I've said repeatedly in other vlogs, the technology in the cameras, the capabilities of the cameras now are reaching a point where there's more and more and more users who are not at such a bleeding edge on the edge of photography that they have to have that 1% performance improvement or that 2% performance improvement, that shooting with older cameras is very much viable, and it's becoming more and more and more viable as the technology gets better and better and better. Like, when everybody was shooting with 8 megapixel cameras and 20 megapixel cameras came out, that was a big leap. But when you're shooting with a 30 megapixel or a 40 megapixel camera and a 50 megapixel camera comes out, the leap isn't so great anymore. So I would like to see actual detailed, this applies to Z9, this applies to Nikon, Canon, Sony, everybody. I would like to see actual detailed charts and data for all compatible lenses that are image stabilized and not image stabilized. So if you're talking in-body stabilization, I want to know what that does with a non-stabilized lens that I put on it for your system. And certainly Nikon in their labs has one of every lens that they currently manufacture. And certainly Canon in their labs has one of every lens that they manufacture. Probably one of every lens that they've ever manufactured. Because I really can't imagine, if you're a company like Canon or Nikon, you don't keep samples of everything that you've ever produced so that you can go test things or deal with things or look at things. Like, you certainly just don't go, well, that the 50F1 from 2000 or from 1990 or 1989, that was a nice lens, but it's out of production, we don't need to keep it, chuck it in the trash. Like, that would be completely ridiculous for companies this size doing this kind of work, especially when they advertise that, like in the case of the EOS Rs, with the EF to EOS R mount adapter, you can put a lens from circa 1986 on your EOS R5. I'm not sure why you'd want to, but you can, and it should work. There's nothing anywhere in the documentation that says EF lenses after 2004, or something to that effect. And for example, I've used my 24-70 f2 or f4. No, my 24-105 f4L. It's the original one from Canon. It's a 1998 generation lens on my R5, and it works. And that's entirely the point of electronic systems, is it should just work. So 6 stops of coordinated image stabilization with certain lenses. No idea what the actual image stabilization is going to be with the non-stabilized lenses. I don't see anything anywhere in... I don't see anything anywhere in the specs that talk about what actually is the image stabilization capability. So let's see. Moving along. The monitor. 4-way tippy articulated monitor. I don't know if I like that. I can see some value in it to a certain extent. Like, I'm not going to say that it's crap or something like that, but I don't know. See, this is where I end up with a problem with articulated displays. So there is an extent to where I like Canon's articulating displays that flip around out to the side. Largely because I'm not always behind the camera. And I can flip the display around and use it in the field to record a vlog or record a bit to camera. And I can see myself and I don't have to carry an external monitor for that. I find that to be, that's definitely a plus. Now, the counterpoint to that is, I would argue that I feel like they're fragile. I haven't broken one. I don't know how many people have. I haven't seen this rash of R5 and R6 users complaining about how they broke the display off the camera and it's, you know, trash and blah, blah, blah. It'll be interesting to see where things go with the R3. But there are definitely cons to having to work like this, you know, with the display open to the side and rotated out on the side. Like that's definitely puts the display in a more fragile place than what Nikon's doing. So I could see a pro to Nikon's screen, which is I think it should be more rugged than what Canon's doing. Now, the flip side, of course, is that if you have to get in front of the camera, if you're going to do a bit to camera, which, you know, I mean, I'm sure there's people who would say, well, nobody's going to buy a Z9 and, you know, use it to vlog. Okay, except I've seen people vlog on 1D Mark IIIs. Peter McKinnon did that, and he's a big-time YouTuber. Anybody who's doing YouTube is a solo content creator for something. Not having to switch cameras is a, you know, like, if I was a Nikon shooter and I'm still doing YouTube as I'm doing now, I don't want to have to change cameras or have multiple cameras. So this is a personal thing, I guess. A couple of years ago when I went to Yellowstone, I bought a second 5D Mark IV and I had two identical cameras. And the thing that I discovered of having two identical cameras is that two identical cameras or using two identical cameras is awesome. It's way, way nicer than having two or three different kinds of cameras, or even two cameras of the same class, as like two 5Ds, but of different generations. The amount of, I don't have to worry about this, or this configuration is different, or this button's not in the same place, or it can't do what one camera can't do something the other camera can do, is fantastic. So if I'm a high-end professional photographer that's also doing YouTube work, and I'm a Nikon user, like, first of all, looking at Nikon's camera lineup, I'm selling everything and buying Z9s. There's nothing in Nikon's product line at all at this point with this announcement of the Z9, regardless of what I've said about cautions, caveats, concerns, whatever. There's nothing in Nikon's product line that is remotely interesting now that they've got the Z9. D6, throw it out. Z7 Mark II, trash it. Z6 Mark II, get rid of it. Buy a Z9. Like I said, this is at the start of this. This is the first Nikon mirrorless camera that's not recycled. I guess I should say full frame, but the first serious professional level Nikon mirrorless camera that's not just recycled DSLR hardware being pressed into being a stopgap product. I find the camera compelling as a Canon user. I'm not going to switch for it because I don't like Nikon's usability and ergonomics, but I do find the camera compelling as a Canon user. I would find the Canon camera probably compelling as a Sony user, although they might argue that because the Alpha 1 is a non-gripped camera, that it's smaller, more compact, blah, 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 that's better, etc., etc., etc. If I was a Nikon shooter, I would be, this is it. I just don't see a reason not to go with the Z9. So let's see. Oh, here's another one. Nikon is advertising in the Z9 the where was it? It was sensor shield. It automatically closes the shutter when you remove a lens. Why is this not a feature on every mirrorless cameras from everybody? Like on Canon, you have to turn the camera off for the thing to detect that you've removed a lens. And I've had people tell me, well, if you're smart in an electronic camera, it doesn't matter what brand, blah, blah, blah. You always turn your camera off before you remove the lens. Look it. If the engineers are doing their job correctly, this should all be hot swappable. I don't turn my computer off to unplug a USB drive. I don't turn my phone off to unplug it from a charger. I should not have to turn my camera off to remove a lens. On top of that, I shouldn't have to turn the camera off to get it to close the sensor or the shutter because I'm removing a lens. Like it's a couple of lines of code in any reasonably competent language on the interrupt trigger for the lens status. When the lens becomes disconnected or undetected, close the shutter. It's not rocket surgery. Why is Nikon the first company that's doing this, at least that I've seen? Maybe I missed it with Sony or something like that, but why is this the first why is this not a thing in every bloody mirrorless camera? I mean, the same thing goes with their VR lock. Why is it not a thing to lock the image stabilizing element in the camera when you power the camera off or it goes to sleep? I mean, it's just, I don't get it. Now, I mean, I guess the counter argument would be that the VR system, if you're not putting that in the camera, the VR system is more than capable of handling vibration and impact. Maybe that's the thing. Maybe the thing is that Canon's VR system is, or Sony's, is good enough that you don't have to worry about the fact that the sensor is vibrating, or is floating when the camera is vibrating. I mean, or, you're like driving over rough terrain or something like that. I mean, there's definitely been a trend in Canon to move from locked VRs to floating VRs. A lot of the EF lenses that have image stabilization, when you power off the camera, they lock the elements. A lot of the lenses now, they float. Now, I'm assuming that this isn't just we're cheap. I'm assuming that this is being done so that because between testing, experience, other lenses that have been in the field, etc., that they just have come to the conclusion that the image stabilization systems can float and not get damaged. I mean, that's the best that I can come up with. But on the same token, as a photographer, I find myself going, why is this not a thing? Why do we not have the ability to close the shutter automatically when the lens is dismounted? It's like it's rocket surgery. And have the ability to lock image stabilizing systems when the camera is off or asleep. So good job, Nikon. Thank you for finally having the intelligence as a camera company to do stuff intelligently. Oh, and by the way, the comment about lenses should be hot plugged. If you go look at the patents for the EF and RF mounts, the patents very clearly indicate that the lenses are designed to be hot plugged. The way they connect things, the two power planes or the isolated power and data planes, the patents, regardless of what the manual says, the patents show a mount that was designed to be hot plugged. So everything should flow from that. Okay, moving along, couple final thoughts. Really interesting that they put a full-size HDMI Type A connector on the camera. I actually like that. I don't see why, especially when you start talking about a full height grip single piece gripped camera, especially now that you don't need a big USB port because you can use a Type C port, or everybody's using Type C ports and those are compact. You don't need a crap load of sort of random stuff on the side of the camera. I mean, you need mic, headphones, video, USB, and in the case of like a Z9 or an R3 or whatever, LAN. You're going to put gigabit LAN, put gigabit LAN. I'm not going to complain about it. I think you're better off, in my experience. Wi-Fi is a better solution. It's not as fast, unfortunately, but not having cables to trip over is better than having cables to trip over. So but if you're going to do that, but if you have the room, a full Type A connector is definitely nicer than the alternatives. Canon went to a micro connector. What is it? Type C, I think, is what HDMI calls it. It's smaller, and I'm not even sure it needed to be made smaller. Like, I'm not sure that they couldn't have managed to put I'm pretty sure they could have somehow managed to fit a mini on the R5. I also don't understand why Canon continues to insist on putting a PC sync terminal on the R5. It takes up space and it doesn't. Who does anybody use those anymore? If you still use a PC sync cable and not wireless triggers or whatever, leave me a comment. I'd like to know, because and are using a modern like $4,000 or $5,000 camera. I'd really like to know, because that really strikes me as being an odd combination. Nikon also GPS in camera. I am so frustrated with Canon on the R5 that they got rid of the GPS that the 1DX had. And I'm looking, as I'm not even sure if there's a GPS in the R3. Yeah, okay, so the R3 has GPS, but the R5 doesn't have GPS. Yeah, I know you can do it with a cell phone. I know that's what the R5 wants. I don't like the idea of having my cell phone battery run down just as much as I'm running down my camera battery. The short of it is I have more batteries for the camera. Second of it is that in my experience, I've gotten like 3 or 4 days of shooting with the GPS enabled and tracking things on the camera, doing track logs, to the point where I didn't really see any significant change in battery life by having the GPS built in. And it just was so much easier to not have to, I got to remember to turn on my phone and start the GPS and blah, blah, blah. Like, I could literally leave the GPS running on the camera for a 14-day road trip. Yeah, I'd have to change batteries, but I'd have to change batteries anyway, and it would work. So I'm really happy to see GPS in the Z9. I really feel like that should just be a standard thing in cameras. Now, here's the killer thing to me. Price. $5496.95. We'll just call it $5,500 US is what it's being advertised at. Now, I don't think you're going to be able to get a Z9 anytime soon. I don't think, given the general electronics parts shortages that are going around the world, and the lack of availability for everything else, this is not going, I don't see the Z9 being available, generally speaking, just like you could buy it anytime soon. I think it's going to be crushed under part shortages, and then compounded, I think it's going to be crushed under the fact that it basically undercuts the cost of everything. So Canon wants $6,000 for the R3. And I'm not going to say the R3 is a crap camera, but if Canon, if the R3, if I had a choice between an R3 and a Z9 in the R3 form factor, because personally, I don't like Nikon ergonomics and user interface design. So that's a huge reason why I wouldn't consider switching to Nikon. But if I had a choice between R3, Z9 in, like I said, the R3 form factor, use a Canon body, I'd buy a Z9. In fact, if I was not quite as opposed to Nikon ergonomics, I would seriously consider buying a Z9. The undercutting the price of the R3, I think, well, I've said this before. I said this from the start. I thought the R3 was overpriced. I thought it was a $5,000 camera at best, based on the specifications that Canon launched it at. It's not a $6,000 camera in my estimation. Now, Canon has the situation, and I think Nikon's going to be in the same boat. Canon is saying they can't make cameras as fast as they're being sold, or as fast as they're being pre-ordered. And I'll buy that. And I really think, although Nikon's not talking about it, I am dubious that, I mean, either there's going to be no demand, or Nikon's going to have a press release at some point saying that there's way more demand for the Z9 than they ever anticipated, and that there's going to be delays. But the reality of the world right now is there's shortages of electronics across the board. It's driving up the costs of cars. It's driving down the production rates of cars, things that you wouldn't even imagine or think about with respect to electronics. I just don't see a camera like this priced at this point. And the Z9 is definitely priced in the where I think it should be point. I mean, in fact, I would say Nikon could have priced this at $6,000 easily, possibly 6,500. Like, I think the Z9. So I've said for a long time that the thing that with mirrorless is that it allows, by shifting so much of the camera into software, it allows the expensive, complicated bill of material things in the camera to be eliminated. Shutter mechanisms, not that they're being eliminated completely, but the reliance on high-speed shutter mechanisms can be reduced. There's no optical viewfinder. There's no mirror mechanism. All of that stuff comes out. That's all a cost on a per-camera basis. Obviously, like, a sensor is a cost on a per-camera basis, but you stop and think about, let's just say, take the Z9. Z9 D6. The Z9, you have a sensor, an EVF, and an LCD, and a processor. I mean, I'm going to ignore, like, memory and capacitors and resistors and terminals, and all that crap. But a D6 you have, and that's in the camera. So things that have to be fabricated. D6 you have a sensor, an autofocus sensor, a metering sensor, an optical viewfinder, did I say a shutter with the Z9? So you have shutters in both, a mirror with a mirror drive, and a processor. Now, these are, like I said, these are individual unit costs. The engineering of all of the design for this stuff, and of course the engineering had to be done for all of the extra things that are in the D6 or a DSLR in general, that doesn't have to go into the design of the hardware and testing of the hardware for a mirrorless camera. So in theory, mirrorless cameras should be able to be cheaper for the same or better capabilities than a DSLR. It's just the reality, like, from a bill of materials perspective. Now, we're talking about cameras. At the high end, they would be called, quote, luxury goods. And at the high end, they're hitting price points that are targeted price points. They're not necessarily just, well, it cost us $1,000 to build the camera, so we'll sell it for $2,500 and that's our profit. The tiering doesn't work quite like that. Or we'll sell it for $1,200 and that $200 profit, that's good. The tiering doesn't work quite like that. the you're paying for value. When it comes to the RR3, $6,000 is not a value that I see in that camera. Like, I grumbled about $3,800 for the R5, but I find that there's $3,800 worth of value in the R5. There's more value in the R5 than there was in the 5D, or there is in the 5D Mark IV, called launch prices, just comparing that. There isn't $6,000 value in the R3 as far as I'm concerned, and there's more than $5,500 worth of value in the Z9. And it's just straight up the way I see it. I think Nikon should have priced the camera higher. And I think a higher initial price would help with supply issues because, eventually prices will come down. On Canon's side of the side of things, with both the R5 and as they're saying with the R3, even though they're not on sale yet, or they're not shipping yet, but with both the R5 and the R3, the prices were higher and the demand was so high that the cameras were perpetually out of stock. Like the R3s were perpetually, or the R5s were perpetually out of stock for like 6 months, or something to that effect, 4 months. I have no idea what the situation is going to be with the R3, but a higher price tag means that there are going to be fewer people who are just buying it opportunistically. People who need it are going to buy it, but people who just kind of want it, they're not. So for example, I've looked at the R3, I've thought about the R3, I've looked at what I've, what I could get if I, what I would get if I got another R5 and what I want to do, a second mirrorless body, get rid of the DSLRs, etc. And the conclusion that I've come to, for me personally, is that a second R5 is a way better value, a way better value / everything than buying an R3. Now, if the R3 was $5,000, my R5 with a battery grip's $4,200. That might be a slightly, or $4,300 or something like that. That might be a slightly different discussion. On the flip side, if I'm shooting Nikon and I'm looking at the Z6 and I'm even remotely considering a Z7 Mark II, well, I'm not considering a Z7 Mark II anymore. That just, I'll save the pennies. I'll, take a second job. I'll sell my kidney, whatever. But the Z7 Mark II compared to the Z6 or the Z9 is, did I say Z6? Compared to the Z9, the Z7 Mark II is not really compelling at all. And then at the price point, I think Nikon's going to do well with this. I'd be happy to see Nikon do well with this because I'm really not a fan of Sony. Even though my friends who shoot Nikon say I hate Nikon, I really am not a fan of Sony. I don't like the way the company does business. And I don't really think that they're all that interested. They've done things in the past that I don't particularly agree with, and I hold it against the company. Certainly they make reasonable technology. Their cameras aren't garbage, but I don't feel like, personally, I'd like to not see Sony be the number 2 camera company. I'd like to see them be behind Canon and Nikon. But I also don't want it, the same token when I say that is, I also don't want that to be colluded or however you'd want to put it. Like, I want to see Canon and Nikon make better products. The Z9 is definitely Nikon making a better product. So one quick thing before I wrap up this ridiculously overly long video. Along with the Z9, Nikon announced that they have a 400-2.8. It's a Z-mount 400-2.8 with a teleconverter coming that's in the works. That could be very interesting. I'd like to see more. I'm really disappointed with the Canon RF 400-2.8 and 600 f4. I understand why they are what they are, at least my take on why they are what they are, that they're basically the EF lenses made RF'd without a mount adapter, with integral, just the mount has been changed. But I found that and optically the lenses are really good. And Canon was in kind of a wonky position with the 400 2.8 and 600 f4 in that they just launched new EF versions like not that like long before they decided to do the RF versions. And I could see not wanting to completely reinvent the wheel when you have a lens that's only 2 years old. And if you can use all of the same tooling and all of the same optics tooling and all of the same manufacturing, and it's a really good lens, it's not like it's a crappy lens. But if you can use all of the same production stuff and just change one little part in the software in it, that's a really good, that's a good business decision, I'll say. Not necessarily a great, well, it's a cool new thing, but it's a good business decision. I like teleconverters and lenses. I like built-in teleconverters. I think that's a good strategy. And I like seeing that Nikon's doing that more. So they've got the F-mount 180 to 400 with the teleconverter. And now they've got a 400 2.8 with a teleconverter. Like I said, I don't know if I've talked about this, but I've said I think if there was a lens that I would really like to see somebody make, it's a 100 to 300 2.8 with a built-in 2x teleconverter. I think that would be a really interesting lens to play with. But anyway, along with the 400 2.8 development announcement, they also announced a 100 to 400 f4.5 to 5.6 VR, a 24 to 120 f4, and a new F to Z mount adapter that's thinner and more streamlined and works with battery cameras with battery grips better. Which again, this is one of those things, like I look at the whole development process that Nikon's gone through with the Z series cameras, and the first ones didn't have battery grips at all. They were just a little battery pack, and who cared that the big bulbous chunk on the bottom of the FTZ mount adapter. And I don't know where the thought process was, because if you're trying to sell serious cameras to serious photographers, lots of them are going to want vertical shooting grips. And it seems like this is a bad decision of Nikon past catching up with them, because if they'd have just thought about battery grips in the first place, they wouldn't be needing to release an FTZ2 mount adapter to work better with cameras with battery grips or vertical shooting grips. So anyway, I said this was going to be long. This has ended up being a almost 2-hour long vlog / podcast. I'm going to wrap this up here. It has definitely been an interesting week in photography. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. If you found this interesting or useful, or you have some thoughts on the Z9 or anything else I talked about, drop it in the comments below. If you found this interesting or useful, please let me know by smashing that like button. If this kind of thing seems like it might be your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. Remember, if you don't subscribe now, you can't forget to unsubscribe later. And as always, again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.